Welcome to the Savvy Dentist Podcast with Dr. Jesse Green, the show where great dentistry meets great business. Listen in each week as we bring you an inspiring person who will share their story, ideas and business techniques to help you create a practice and a life you love. And now introducing your host, Dr. Jesse Green.
Welcome back to the Savvy Dentist Podcast, the show where great dentistry happily collides with great business. Our guest today is Gabrielle Dolan, and she's going to be talking to us all around storytelling and thought leadership. Two topics which I think are underdone when it comes to business. It's not an obvious thing for a dental practice to be thinking about, but I think it is incredibly relevant. And just because it's not obvious doesn't mean that there's not a place for it. Gabrielle has got an incredibly diverse background. She started off life in a senior management role for the NAB and has moved into various educational processes, studying at Harvard, Swinburne University, and of course now is a best-selling author of a gazillion different books. And a book that I'm very familiar with is Stories for Work, but she's got a new guide out, which she's going to be talking about in a moment, called Real Communication, How to Be You and Lead True, which is available shortly. And of course, Gabrielle, welcome to our program. It's wonderful to have you.
Well, it's wonderful to be here, and thank you for that very generous introduction.
Well, I'm curious to ask you because your story is compelling. I know you're in the space of storytelling, so I'm curious to, of course, understand your own story. Doesn't sound like the most linear of pathways to do the work that you've done. How did you find your way into senior positions at NAB and then into storytelling and then consulting for the ASX 200 type companies? How did that work out?
Yeah, it did. I think in your intro you said I started life as a senior leader. I certainly didn't start life that way. My first job was a trainee mainframe computer operator, which actually makes me feel quite old because I'm not even sure how many mainframes they still use these days. But I was a bit of a lazy student at school, so I failed English, which is quite ironic considering I've just published my 5th book. So I moved straight from school into trainee computer operator roles and just worked my way through there and didn't go back to uni till I was about 28. So I decided I was actually more excited about the training and education part of working with technology leaders to help them on training and leading. And so I went back to uni and did an Associate Diploma of Education and Training and found I actually really liked the challenge of studying, and then went and did an MBA in Management and Leadership, and then progressively moved into senior leadership roles where I guess understood firsthand the challenges of leading teams and leading people and leading change, and realised the power of storytelling there. So I left NAB about 15 years ago to start my own business on storytelling, and in between kept up some professional development by going to the likes of Harvard, just purely because you never get sick of saying when I went to Harvard, really.
Well, it does roll off the tongue very nicely, doesn't it?
Rolls off the tongue very nicely.
I wanted to ask you about your Harvard experience because I'm looking at your bio and it says here that you were looking in the work you did at Harvard was around leadership development, women and power, leadership in a new world. So I guess it's an interesting topic. And of course, we're living in changing times. We're seeing many, many more women step into senior roles, and probably not enough by every metric, but still it seems to be a change underway. Why is it you think that storytelling and leadership go hand in hand? Why is it that they fit hand in glove?
Yeah, look, I think one of the key challenges of leadership is when you're communicating, do people actually understand what you're saying as a bare minimum? But then do they actually engage and connect with it and sort of, dare say, even get excited? So whether it's about a new change or a new strategy or just a project or whatever it is we're working on, how do you communicate that in a way that people understand and actually feel somehow connected to it? And I think doing that via stories, and in fact I know doing it via stories is a really more powerful way to communicate your message. And we're seeing more of this concept of being authentic leaders and real communication. And I truly do believe that Gen Y is driving that. Gen Y are, I guess, demanding a different type of leadership and a different type of communication style. And then their expectations are differently. They're just not going to do stuff because they're told to do it. They're going to do stuff when they get engaged and connected and feel part of it. So communicating in a way that taps into that is critical as opposed to just telling them what needs to be done.
So why is it then that stories engage so well? Is it the fact that they're tapping into our imagination, or is it because we're creating an emotional connection? What is it specifically about storytelling that engages people?
Yeah, so it taps into emotion. So there's been a huge amount of research done how our brain reacts differently when we hear a story as opposed to when we hear facts and figures and logic and stuff. And so all the research tells us that it releases all these hormones that, are related to like the love hormone. It's almost the same reaction we have when, we hug someone we love. So it increases the emotional connection. It also increases the trust, not only in the message, but the actual person sharing the story. And I think also too, when you share personal stories and some types of personal stories that involve some vulnerability, the people actually really connect with that and respond to that. So it can not only fast track trust and respect, but can actually really deepen the relationship because at some level it's tapped into emotion. And at some level, when it taps into emotion too, there's a lot of research that shows that the brain processes emotionally different to logic. So it not only processes it faster, but it actually gets stored in the long-term part of our brain. So this is why I say it not only helps your people understand the message, but it actually helps them remember the message because through the story, the message now is delivered into the long-term memory part of their brain.
I wanted to ask you a bit about storytelling and culture from the perspective, or maybe it's not directly related to culture, but getting clear about the vision of a business. Clearly, when people we talk about vision, values, mission, all those sorts of statements, which sound grandiose, and oftentimes they're pieces of paper stuck in a file or up on a wall somewhere that don't really come to life. Is it the storytelling there that you think is what engages people as well? When we think about as a business or as an organization, where are we going? What are we trying to do? Is it really, what I'm hearing you say at least, is if we can be telling that in a way that's compelling and interesting and emotionally engaging, then people are going to buy into that vision and ultimately come on board. Is that essentially it?
Yeah, absolutely. I am a strong believer that you can't communicate values without personal story. So the vast majority of my work is companies bring me in when they're rolling out a new strategy or vision or purpose and values. And normally it's new values. And what they realize, it's what you said, you and I are old enough to have gone through a lot of what they call values rollouts, where it was literally words on a wall or words on a coffee mug, and we thought that was all we had to do. But what I find is I work with the leaders to not only give them the skill of storytelling, but through that process to say, we'll pick a company value, like a lot of companies will have a value of integrity, but working with the leaders, for example, to say, what does this really, really mean to you? And get them to think about that and articulate it. And then go, okay, so how have you experienced that outside of work? And then you share a story about your parents, or you share a story about something you did growing up, or you share a story about your kids that demonstrates that value. And the amount of leaders that have said to me, this is the first time I've actually sat down and thought about what the company values or even the company purpose means to me personally. And, when it's the leaders' jobs to actually communicate that, we need to give them the space and the skills, not only to think about it, but to actually communicate it in a way that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And as you say, if you're going to be wanting to have Gen Y work for you for any length of time, then we need to be able to develop that skill, because clearly, as that particular demographic comes further and further into the workforce and the baby boomers move into retirement, we're going to need to get better at that than we've ever been before, in my opinion anyway.
Yeah, absolutely, we do. It's the leaders who are still thinking, just tell them what to do, will not have very good people working for them, because all the good people will go work for someone else that actually connects them to purpose and engages them.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk to you a bit about vulnerability, because I wanted to try and get a differentiation between vulnerability and oversharing. And I totally understand that it's good to let people into your life, but where is that line where it becomes a bit awkward and dips into oversharing? And as I'm having this conversation with you, I'm reflecting on a few things. Just to give some context for the question, I'm reflecting on social media and there's a dearth of what I consider oversharing there. There I was, depressed and lonely and whatever it is, and I'm not trying to make judgment about anyone who might be feeling that way, but where does that become appropriate conversation for business and where does it not become appropriate?
Yeah, look, it's a really good question because I think a couple of things with vulnerability. I think people shy away from it or are scared of it because they think it is letting everyone know their deepest, darkest fears and secrets and stuff like that. And it's certainly not the case. Vulnerability can be as simple as admitting when you made a mistake and what you did about it. To me, it also comes down to the level of vulnerability you show will be dependent on what message you're trying to get across and who you're trying to get it across to. So you might be more willing to show a lot more vulnerability, perhaps in a one-on-one counseling session or a mentoring session or with your immediate team, but maybe not showing the same amount of vulnerability standing up on stage talking to 200 people.
Yeah.
I had someone call me. It was a great example of a client rang, and it was one of those, I heard it through someone who rang me and told me about what they heard someone I was working with, and they had to present to an audience. So it was quite a few hundred people on mental health. It was during the Mental Health Awareness Week. This gentleman who was, I guess he was known as a bit of a tough guy and not really approachable and probably didn't have a great image, got on stage and talked about how he was so obsessed about work that it almost destroyed his marriage, and that him and his wife went through marriage counselling and they worked it out. But he said that was a really bad time for him, and how work had affected him. And he said the amount of people that came up to him afterwards to talk about how they were experiencing the same thing, because his message was about this can happen to all of us and don't let it happen. And we've got all these tools and programs to help when it does.
Yeah.
So you can sort of see that message is quite important.
Yeah.
And so that level of vulnerability was completely appropriate for that. And it also, it sort of almost changed his image because people then saw him as human and approachable, and then felt like they could go up and talk to him about the issues they were having when in the past they couldn't. And therefore these issues get swept under the carpet and not being taken notice of.
So I guess it's the context that really matters, isn't it then?
Yeah, it's the context. It's the level of the message, the context, it's the who you're talking to. But Brené Brown's done amazing research on vulnerability. And what I love about her work is it's when someone shows vulnerability, it's the one thing that we really admire in the other person when they show it. But it's the one thing we're reluctant to do. And too many leaders and people of our generation have grown up being shown that leadership is you've got to be showing strength all the time, and showing vulnerability is a sign of weakness, so you shouldn't do it. When Brené Brown talks about showing vulnerability is our greatest sign of strength and courage, and it's a really powerful thing to step into when you're leading people.
It is, and I think for those people listening to the podcast who are leading teams and wanting to scale their practice or do whatever it is that you want to do within your business or indeed your life outside of work, I should say, what's really interesting in that conversation for me is it gives you permission to be imperfect as well. You don't have to go to work wearing the Superman cape with the undies on the outside and all that sort of stuff. You can actually realize or let people realize that there might be things you don't know the answer to.
Yeah.
There's plenty of things that I'd have no idea about, Gabrielle. And it makes me realize, listening to you and of course listening to Brené Brown, that that's the reality of it all. No one has it all figured out.
Yeah. I think we're in this beautiful place for leadership where we've got a generation that are screaming out to say, let me do it. I want to be involved. I think we should do it this way. I've got all these ideas, and they actually want to be involved from the start. And we're also in an environment where things are changing so dramatically that it's just impossible to have all the answers to everything. So I think it's almost this relief, this letting go, this weight of your shoulders, that just because you are the most senior person in the room, just because perhaps it's your own company and your own practice, that you actually don't have to have all the answers. And there's some real just great things can happen when, as a leader, you've got the courage to say, I actually don't know what we should do here, or I don't know what the answer is. What do you think? And hand it over to this younger generation that actually willingly want to step up to those challenges. So I just think it's this win-win situation for everyone when we realize that we don't have to be the smartest person in the room.
Yes, liberating, that's for sure. It's very
and there's I forget who said it, but someone said if you're the smartest person in the room, you're in the wrong room.
Absolutely. And I think that's actually one of the skills of a leader is to not be the smartest person there and to surround yourself with really smart people. And I think
hire good people and then get out of their way and let them do what they do best.
Totally. Just speaking of leadership, I don't think I can let this particular conversation go past because we're recording this on May the 20th. 2 days ago, we had a federal election, and irrespective of whether people are feeling happy or disappointed with that result, I'm curious to ask about political leadership and storytelling and that, because again, you see authenticity as something that's prized, and yet it must be terribly hard for a politician to try and be authentic without ever present media, the scrutiny, the 24-hour news cycle. How do people like that maintain some level of authenticity and vulnerability? Because if you were the Prime Minister going to the election and said, you know what, I don't have all the answers, I mean, you wouldn't get in. How is it that some people in those roles, how can they be vulnerable and how can they be authentic without diminishing themselves?
Yeah, look, I think politicians have got it really tough because we are so critical of them. And again, because our political beliefs, if we don't like the politician and they say one thing, there's damned if they do and damned if they don't. I think a lot of politicians get to where they are because they're actually quite good communicators. But then once they get to some sort of level of power, I think they get everything scripted out of them. So they're so scared of saying the wrong thing because they know it will just be pounced on by the media and the opposition. So they're so scared of saying the wrong thing that they end up saying nothing. And what that looks like to us is they just stick to script. This is why we see, regardless of what they're asked, they will answer their carefully scripted response. They stick to taglines when they say nothing. And it was interesting, I wrote an opinion piece on when Bill Shorten talked about his mother and shared the story about his mother. And it was actually the most, I think, personal comment of the entire campaign. It's what actually people really connected with. And then when he got attacked by the Murdoch media, it actually allowed him then to come out defend his mother. And you'd have met when he got quite emotional about it. But that was actually the first time we saw a real sign of them being human and showing vulnerability. But so, look, they're damned if they do, they're damned if they don't. I'd like to see a lot more of it, but I'd also like us as the punters just to go easy on when they do it.
Totally.
And not to criticise them for everything they say.
Well, and again, I don't want to kind of get into a political debrief because I'm not an expert in that by any stretch, but it was really interesting from my perspective. And again, whichever team you support is irrelevant to me at the moment. But I guess the point being is that one moment of vulnerability, in the eyes of many, were calling that as a turning point in the election. Now, it didn't turn out that way, of course, as the results have shown, but it goes to show how much we crave that authenticity and to look behind the perfect veneer of...
Yeah, absolutely. And it was, I think it was, I think the opinion piece I wrote was the story that turned the election. Yeah. Obviously didn't turn it that much. But it's interesting to see Labor come out in the last couple of days, and one of the reasons they're saying that they didn't get across the line was they talked about their policies, and they fully believe that they're good policies, and they're actually saying we think the problem was we didn't communicate them well enough, which again, you can have the best policies in the world, and again, when I talk with companies, you can have the best strategy in the world, but if your people don't understand it and they're not connected with it, then it just doesn't matter how great the strategy is or how great the policy is if you can't communicate it properly.
Absolutely. We've really established the fact that being able to tell a story and communicate effectively is critical to leadership, critical to be able to communicate a point. I guess my next question or next thought is, what are the common mistakes that people make when they are trying to tell a story or engage with people through storytelling?
Yeah, look, there's a few common mistakes that are really easily avoidable. And one of the first ones I see is people say, let me tell you a story. And it's like, oh, God, like as soon as someone says, let me tell you a story, it was like your reaction is like, please don't tell me a story. So starting in a way that indicates that you're telling a story, but not actually saying, let me tell you a story. It's sort of like, that reminds me of when I was 20 and went on an African safari. So you now automatically know I'm going to tell you a story, but you're engaged with it as opposed to saying, let me tell you a story. Another common mistake is that the stories go on for way too long. So it doesn't matter how intriguing you think your stories are. In a work context, so in a business-related context, you need to get to your point pretty quickly.
Yeah.
My rule of thumb is about 1 to 2 minutes. And I think once you're going over 2 minutes, people are either thinking and sometimes saying, get to the point. But what they're doing is they're well and truly switched off before you've stopped talking. So there's some real discipline around what you decide goes in the story and what you decide is omitted from the story. And one of the keys to that is having one single message. So the other mistake I see people make is they're trying to get across 3 or 4 messages in the one story, and you just need to be clear on what is your one single message. And if you stick to that, then that helps with keeping the story succinct. Well, it can help, certainly.
Okay. So we've articulated the need to become good storytellers because that's a useful and, in fact, almost essential leadership skill for the modern world. We've outlined some mistakes that commonly occur when it comes to storytelling. Is there an anatomy of a good story? Are there universal features of a good story? How do we create a story?
I think a lot of people will talk about the 6 different types of stories and the 8 different types and the hero's journey.
Yeah.
I think for a story to be a story, it needs to have, so as a bare minimum, it needs to have a beginning, middle and end. So don't be that person that tells stories without an ending. So it needs a beginning, middle and end. Something needs to have happened. And what I say about that, like a specific event needs to have taken place. So too often when we're in work, we talk in generalities or we talk in hypotheticals. It's got to be a really specific event. And because when you bring in the specific event, that is what helps people visualize it and feel a connection with. So when we talk in generalities, it's very hard to visualize. When we talk in factual statements, it's very hard to visualize. So a lot of people on their website, for example, they'll have our story. And when you go in and look, it's just a timeline of their company, or a timeline of the practice. And that is not a story because I cannot visualize that and I can't have any emotional connection. So you got to have a specific event that helps people visualize it and helps people feel something, because in the end, if you don't see it and if you don't feel it, I can almost guarantee you it's a story.
Yeah.
It's not, it's a guarantee you it's not a story if you don't see anything or feel something.
Cool.
And that's why a lot of people talk about case studies. In most instances, case studies are not stories. They're really, really valuable information. I run a practice on business storytelling and I absolutely use case studies, but it's hard to visualize and it's hard to feel something with case studies. They're normally just very practical information of this is what the problem was, this is what we did, this is how we resolved it, this is what the consequences. All valuable, but not a story.
Yeah, and I imagine with the case study, again, you're going to engage people logically, but emotionally, perhaps not so much, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And you do sometimes, I think, have a story to get people engaged and connected, and then bring in the factual or the logic when they're going, okay, I really want to know more about this now. But too often we just start with the logic and end with the logic, and it just doesn't engage people.
No. So I wanted just to shift gear for a second. The concept of storying for leadership we've gone through, but I wanted to ask you about storytelling from a marketing perspective, because if you think about marketing and dental practices in the same sort of categories, it's important for us to be able to differentiate ourselves from other people. It helps if we can tell our story and avoid commoditization. What's been your experience in helping businesses stand out from the crowd through effective storytelling?
Storytelling is a really good way to stand out from the crowd. I think there's quite a few stories that people could share that they don't. I mean, if you're running a dental practice, I would go, what is it? Have a story about why you found dentistry so fascinating. Like, why are you doing it? And not just a timeline of, but is there a story about when you were 8 and something happened and from that point on you knew you wanted to become a dentist? So it's almost why you started this. I'd also have stories around all your values you have. Now, these just might be your own personal values, or you may have stated values in your company, but a lot of companies doing the same stuff. So again, if you're a dentist, you're probably doing 95% exactly the same as every other dentist out there.
Yeah.
So how can you differentiate yourself through the values that you bring? And you need to have stories about them, just not saying these are our values. So I think there's quite a handful of stories that dentists should think about, and then how do they communicate them. So whether they might be on their website, if they might be doing newsletters, they might write in industry publications, even just when they're recruiting people, how do the stories they share make either employees go, I want to come and work for you, or make customers go, I want to come and be served by you.
Yeah, I would love to see an ad on Seek or something like that was so much more engaging than the proverbial position vacant apply within kind of ad. It's just, oh my God, It's so droll.
Yeah, it's normally full of jargon and big buzzwords that no one even knows half of what they're saying.
Exactly. And then people wonder why they're not attracting the best and brightest to their business, and because it's not engaging. And I think coming back to your original point, it's got to engage.
Yeah, absolutely. A job interview could seriously be a story from the owner of why they're so passionate about dentistry. And then it's almost like, and if you're as passionate as this, then we'd love to talk to you.
Yeah.
You're going to get really passionate people coming to apply for your job.
Which, for most dentists listening to this, would be a welcome relief. So, guys, giddy up, get the stories out and get on with it, I say.
Yeah.
Gabrielle, I want to talk to you about thought leadership because I know that's your other area of expertise and you're very well known in the business space for it. Can you tell me exactly what you mean by thought leadership?
Yeah, look, what I mean by, and you talked about how do you differentiate yourself from the rest of the market. Thought leadership is a proven way to do this. So where I come and, I know I teach people how to be the thought leaders in their field, the gurus in their field. It's just, to raise their influence and stand out. To me, there's a few things you need. You certainly got to have some expertise. So you obviously got to know what you're talking about, but you've got to have passion. And I think those two are really important because to me, thought leadership is about constantly developing your ideas and your thoughts on your area of expertise, but then having the passion to write about them, to talk about them in a way that serves the community. So look, there's no doubt commercially being known as the guru in the field, it's a commercially smart thing to do. But I think if you come from a place of service, so you combine your expertise and passion to come from a place of service is where you're constantly providing valuable content, the commercial benefits will just flow from that. I see a lot of people who run their own small companies or, could even be practices, and how it can be seen as an exit strategy as well. So how do they become known as the expert, and then over time they're the gurus, they're being asked to speak, they're being asked to write, and then they can potentially sell their business or sell their practice, but you can't take away that thought leadership. They will still be known as the experts in their field, even though they've potentially sold their practice or company.
And again, I think it's really powerful. It's about, as you say, it's about getting your ideas and capturing them and expressing them. And I think there's a lot to be said for that. I wanted to, on the topic of thought leadership, because small business owners might be sitting here thinking, well, Gabrielle, does that really relate to me? I'm a dentist. I've got my hands in people's mouths all day. What could I possibly say around dentistry? But there really is a limitless amount of things you could say and how you could position yourself, isn't there? I mean, it's really as much as you can imagine.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I have a lot of people that come and do my programs and their thought leadership might be around customer service, or their thought leadership might be around leadership or change management. And it's easy to say, well, who am I to be the guru in change management? Because there's so many gurus that are already doing that. Or who am I to be the guru in customer service or dentistry? But the reality is no one's had your experience. So you have your own stories, you have your own experience, you have your own thoughts. And if you learn how to develop them in a way that's not only relevant, but it's really thorough and quite unique by bringing in your own unique stories, then you can provide value. So it's not like you have to invent something that's never been done before, but you're just saying, from my experience, from what I know, I think this is the way it works, or I think this is a better way to do it, or I think we're not exploring this enough. And you just start developing those ideas. But all this takes time. And that's why I say you got to have the passion, and it's got to come from a place of service, because it's almost another job on top of your day-to-day job.
Yeah, absolutely. It really is a lot of work. But again, the dividends are there for those who put in that work. Gabrielle, I wanted to ask you, if you were to summarize thought leadership and, of course, the ability to tell stories, Where do they intersect?
Yeah, great question. So they do. It's funny. I run 2 training programs, and one's on thought leadership, and one's on storytelling. And sometimes I run them as like a combined core program. So with the thought leadership, one of the things we talk about is how do you develop your ideas at a really high level? So with models, like can you turn that into a model and a metaphor? How do you go left brain and right brain? So how do you bring in all the research and the stats and the quotes? And how do you bring right brain? And the right brains is all your stories. So not only your own personal stories, but perhaps stories about your clients and patients and that even some case studies that come into that. So it's whole brain thinking. So that's the thought leadership piece. The storytelling piece is specifically for stories. So whether you want to be a thought leader or not, literally if your job involves communicating and if your job involves influencing and leading people or leading anything, but pretty much communicating and influencing people, then stories can really help you do that. Yeah. So that sort of skill applies to most people in business, where thought leadership would only apply to a certain amount of people that had the expertise and the passion and the desire to do the work.
Yeah, fantastic. Ladies and gents, if you've just joined us, we're having a conversation with Gabrielle Dolan, and you can find her at gabrielledolan.com. And just a couple of things I want to point out on your website. You've got this fantastic 7-day storytelling starter kit. So we've covered material around storytelling today, and I'd really encourage everyone to firstly head across to Gabrielle's website and check it out. There's a monumental amount of stuff on that website.
There's a handful of white papers that also may be useful too around storytelling, one particularly on storytelling and one on thought leadership. So, and they're all just free on the resource tab of the website. But the 7-day storytelling starter kit could be a really good place to start, where you literally just get an email from me once a day for 7 days with a really short video, just giving you some ideas to think about how you can start to gather your stories and share them.
Fantastic. So, ladies and gents, I'd really commend those resources to you. I've had a good poke around the website, and I tell you, it's a treasure trove. There's lots of goodies there. So I'd really encourage you to get on board and have a look through that. Gabrielle, you've been incredibly generous with your time today. And firstly, I want to say thank you, because the things that you've spoken about today, I think for most dentists listening to this podcast, they would be relatively new concepts. We might have heard the word storytelling as a buzzword. We might have heard the word or the phrase thought leadership as another buzzword. But I think what you've been able to do really elegantly is to explain in detail what they are, how to do them, and some of the things to look out for along the way. And looking at that through the lens of being able to lead great teams, to be able to lead patients as well. So it's very practical, and I really thank you for that.
Pleasure.
I wanted to just ask you, as we wrap up, if you wanted to leave the audience with some parting thoughts, whether it's around leadership, storytelling, or thought leadership in addition to general leadership, what would be, I guess, the gospel according to Gabrielle?
I guess maybe I'll just say and this is probably a subtle plug for my latest book, but just have the courage to, I guess, move away from the default way of doing things and have the courage to just be you, to lead in a way that's authentic, to show vulnerability, to have the courage to share stories, and just lead authentically and communicate in a way that's real, because it's what the people you lead, the customers you serve, they really deserve nothing less. So I think just have the courage to step into that.
Yeah, and I think people will be really drawn to that as well. So even though it might take a little bit of courage to begin with, I think once you've done that, you'll see some really wonderful results. People will be drawn to you.
The amount of people that have shared with me their reluctance to share a story, and then they sort of did, and were just blown away by the results, and they sort of ring me or email me going, "What? This really works. This really works." I go, "Yes, I know." It really works. Just give it a crack. Just give it a go.
Yeah. Gabrielle, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. I'm really looking forward to getting my hands on your latest book. And ladies and gents, I'm sure you'll agree with me. The material that we've gone through today is incredibly valuable. So thank you once again.
Thank you for listening to the Savvy Dentist podcast with Dr. Jesse Green. For more free tools and resources, join the free Facebook group. Visit drjessegreen.com/Facebook. And for more episodes, visit drjessegreen.com/savvydentist.